All right. I am Erin McGurl, and I'm so pleased to welcome you when what is afternoon in New York City, but is evening in the UK and the morning on the West Coast, where all of our presenters are in every time zone just about today. And I'm pleased to welcome you to this event, Documenting Social Movement, Bibliography, Archives, and Protest. BSA is proud to co-sponsor this event with the Bibliographical Society of Canada and the Bibliographical Society of the UK. And if you're joining us from one of those organizations, welcome. I want to remind you that as an attendee, you agree to abide by the BSA Events Code of Conduct, and I'm going to put a link to the Code of Conduct in the chat in case you haven't had a chance to read it yet. So hopefully you've watched the videos we shared in advance on YouTube about the collections that will be discussed today. And I want to explain to you how this Q&A session will work. So our moderator, Mathieu Bouchard, will start by posing some questions to the moderator. But to submit a question to our speakers, which we invite you all to do, please enter it into the Q&A box. All attendees can see, comment on, and upvote questions, and we ask you to do this to help prioritize questions of greatest interest to today's audience. We also encourage you to engage in conversation using Zoom's chat feature. However, if you submit a question via the chat, I will ask you to enter it into the Q&A box. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator today. Mathieu Bouchard is a member of the Council of the Bibliographical Society of Canada. He's also a PhD candidate in English at McGill University and a member of the faculty at John Abbott College in Montreal. Thank you very much, and I will turn it over now to Mathieu.
Thank you, Erin, and thanks to the Bibliographical Society of America for having organized this Zoom meeting. And before getting started, I'd just like to say thank you and give a shout out to my co-organizers who you don't see on the screen, but who have worked really hard to get this whole event organized. So that's Jose Guerrero from the Bibliographic Society of America, and Julianne Simpson and Karen Limper-Hertz from the Bibliographical Society in London. So thanks to all three of them for helping out. So as Erin said, I'll invite all the attendees to post questions in the chat, which I'll be happy to share with our two panelists. And I also have to unfortunately announce that Simone Baudry-Pilote from the Archives Gay du Québec is unable to join us today. But she did ask me to share her contact information with the attendees and invite you all to send her questions or comments directly via email. So I'll put that in the chat in just a few minutes. So as people get warmed up and think about questions they might want to put in the chat, I thought maybe I would get us started with a question for both of our panelists. And my question has to do, well, it kind of comes out of something that Greg, you said a few times in your presentation, which is that the collections that you have are being used quite a bit by students at the university. So I guess my question was a question about access. I'm kind of curious how, for you, but also for the Senate House Library, how students and how researchers are finding out about your collections. So do you have professors sort of bringing students in to use the collection? Is it through outreach programs? Is it a little bit of both? So I'd really be curious to know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I can go first. Hi, I'm Greg. We have, first and foremost, we organize the collections, we get them online, we put them on something called the Online Archive of California, the Finding Aids. We do have a number of classes coming into the archives to look at them. There's stuff that in this presentation, the LA Free Press collection really isn't accessible yet because we're still working on it. It was 400 boxes and it takes a while. The Japanese American Digitization Project is online and there's 50,000 items for students to not only find through their own work and also through our website. So it's a combination of all of that. We do outreach once in a while. We haven't done an enormous amount of outreach because of the pandemic, but basically it's word of mouth within the campus and access to the finding aids outside of the campus.
Yeah, I mean, the Senate House is similar. We have an online catalogue, we have finding aids, but it's also with our special collections, because they are essentially hidden, they are request only. We do a lot of sort of exhibition and events and talks using this material. So we've had various exhibitions over the last few years which have utilised another radical collection we have called the Ron Heisler collection, which was called Radical Voices. We've had a Queer Between the Covers exhibition, and from these we have a range of public engagement events as well which link to the collections, and we hope that these generate return visits. And we have lots of classes that use the collections in various ways. We have lots of collections on the occult as well, and we have lots of modules and courses and researchers using that. But I think that obviously the key thing is getting them on the catalogue first of all, so as people even know they're there. And the collection I was asked to talk about particularly today, the Jonathan Cutwell one, unfortunately isn't yet catalogued because we received it just before the pandemic, the 2 months before we went into lockdown. So, and it's a massive collection. So we are at the moment, this is a big issue for us at the moment. How do we make this particular collection accessible when we haven't yet catalogued it? And I can talk more about what access we do have to the collection and how we are trying to share it at the moment with lots of ideas about community projects. But it's a mixture of community work and traditional bibliographic work with cataloguing and hand lists, I think.
Great, thank you. I see some questions coming in, so I'm going to start with a question from Sarah Werner. So Sarah writes, given the state of politics in the US in particular, and the ways in which public institutions are funded by state governments, I'm wondering how much archivists need to think about how politicians and members of the public might object to public funding associated with collecting these radical archives. And Sarah adds, I suspect that there are similar questions for UK and Canadian colleagues, although perhaps the triggers are different in those places. So a question about funding, but also I think a question about the current state of politics in the US. So I don't know if Greg, you want to start by tackling that, and then
Sure,
Leila.
Sure. The LA Free Press collection was funded by a private organization and by the National Archives Funding Agency, NHPRC. The LGBTQ collection that we have was funded by the state library. So this is California, and we aren't restricted in any sense of the word in that area. Basically, we generally, the National Archives will fund collections of national historic interest, whether they're left, right, or center. I ran into issues with the National Endowment for the Humanities during the Trump administration, in which they did not want us to use the word incarceration instead of internment. That probably has gone by the wayside now, but it's we really the Holt collection that we got was actually funded privately, so we don't rely entirely on government grants, but we do extensively. So we haven't, basically the answer is we haven't faced any political backlash yet in this regard, and it's I'm glad that that's where we're at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it is slightly different in the higher education context in which I work in the UK, in the way that how we are funded. I mean, largely we are funded by the students who pay fees, And then that goes to the university decide how they want to distribute that. And where I work, I should say, Senate House Library is the central library for the University of London. It's a federal university. Each university also has its own library. So we're the central library. And we have, over many years, it's hard for us librarians now to fully understand how it's happened like this, but we have got quite a lot of radical collections going back the 150 years of our existence. So because of that, it's become a natural home in some ways for people coming to us with collections to donate, including the Cut-Bill collection and others. We haven't, as far as I'm aware, had any issues with the nature of the material. The one thing I would say about the material we have is that it is predominantly historic material. I mean, even the Cut-Bill collection, it's not obviously not going to be added to now, but it's large, it's very strong in 1980s material, 70s, 80s, maybe 90s as well. It does extend beyond those and it goes a lot further back. But I wonder if it's partly because these are historic collections that we're looking back on them with a particular eye, that they're somehow easier to assimilate into a higher education environment without it being critiqued as a current live political action. Because, for instance, you were all probably aware of the situation in the UK up till only about 20 years ago, that there was a law called Section 28, which forbade the so-called promotion of homosexual relationships and families, and that was in an educational setting primarily. It's not long that we've managed to get rid of that. So I don't know what would have happened if we got the Cut-Bill collection 20 years ago. It did primarily affect schools, but I think it's primarily because they're historic collections that they are looked at in a different way, perhaps. But we haven't had any issues with any of the collections we've had.
Thank you. So there's another question in the chat from Michael Winship. And I think Michael here is picking up on the fact that the three presentations that were presented material that we could consider potentially as a left-leaning. And I guess the question here is the question about collecting materials from right-leaning social movements. And whether that's something either of your institutions are doing, and I guess if not, thinking a little bit about the value of that and whether there are other organizations that are doing that. So I'm wondering if either of you have any thoughts on Michael's question about the collection of right-leaning social movements and the collection of those materials.
You want to go first?
You go first, Greg, that's fine,
Okay.
and I'll follow you.
All right, thank you. We have a small to medium size amount of material on right-wing movements. One of the bookstores that we deal with, mostly Bellarium Books, gathers material from all sorts of the political spectrum. We have an anti-New Deal collection that basically is saying the same nasty things about the Roosevelts in the 1930s that other folks were saying about the Clintons in 2008. But the current exhibit that I have up has a section on right-wing activism, which focuses mostly on the Red Scare and the moral majority and other things like that. So in this exhibit, we also have material on abortion, and there's definitely material connected with Jesse Helms and the moral majority era of that, the Phyllis Schlafly era of the anti-ERA, and that material is accessible to our students, and it certainly isn't as profound or as extensive as the left-wing stuff, but it's there, and it's accessible for our students.
Yeah, we don't actively collect the material, but within one of our special collections called the Ron Heisler collection, which I mentioned earlier, it's one of our largest special collections, 50,000 pamphlets plus numerous books and archives, all on radical left-wing British material, primarily going back to the 19th century and still being added to today. However, within that, Ron Heisler has also collected some fascist material, often as a sort of a warning, or because it's been in a disputation with some of the other material he's bought it as a sort of representation of the other side, not because he wants to give voice to it necessarily, but because it links in some way to other works that he's collected. We have within the general collection material such as publications from the Eugenics Society, which was linked to the University of London and University College London as well. And Mary Stopes, for instance, we've got works written by Mary Stopes, published by the Eugenics Society. So we have got material within the collections, but the questioner asked about if there are collections who actively collect it, and there is one in the UK. They collect it for an interesting reason, though. At University of Northampton, I was just looking at my phone, but the Searchlight archive is held there, and Searchlight is an anti-fascist monitoring organisation. But as a result of monitoring fascist material, they've collected it. And their archive is therefore at the University of Northampton, and it's a major collection of material documenting the activities of British and international fascist and racist organisations. And I know that they held seminars a couple of years ago about how do you deal with, starting to have discussions about how do you deal with this kind of material, however, whatever the reason it was collected for. So, and I worked at the London School of Economics Library, and there's lots of right-wing material there, and also material that depicts perhaps two sides of a situation such as Palestine. In the situation of Palestine, there's very much political, governmental publications from all sides. So, you know, that there is that sort of thing as well. But at Senate House, sorry, no, we don't actively, but we have got some.
Great, thank you both for that, for those answers. So Julianne Simpson is asking a question, also sort of a question about collecting. So she writes, the AGQ, the Archives Gay du Québec, is a very focused collection, but presumably Girth Archives and Senate House Library have a broader collecting remit. How do these areas sit with overall collecting, and how are priorities decided?
My purpose in collecting materials is to reflect the student body that we have at Cal State Dominguez Hills, but also the community that is nearby, and it is very diverse. We're a majority Latino institution. The Japanese American community was very large, not more than 3 or 4 miles away from here. There's in the current town that we exist in, Carson, California, the Filipino American collection is Filipino American population is very large. And so we collect basically with that in mind, but also in the scheme of trying to build a collection. We collect in a lot of areas just so it will be accessible for the long term, either digitally or physically, for our students and for the greater research community. When I came to Dominguez Hills, the collection was relatively focused on the history of the Dominguez family, which received the first land grant in California from the King of Spain. And after that, we've expanded it into all sorts of areas, Japanese American, the women's movement, the gay movement. The reason is to make it as broad and as interesting as possible for our students, and to keep Dominguez Hills out there as an option for other institutions in LA, which probably have similar material, although they don't have the LA Free Press collection. So it's a lot of that.
At Senate House Library, we have a collection policy and some what we call research themes, which are research strengths of our collection more properly, I suppose. And there are about 8 of those, and they guide everything, and they cross all formats. So they would be with regards our archival collections, our library book collections, both our modern ones and our special collections and our electronic collections. And so amongst those, one of them is radical social movements. That is one of our key collecting areas, which we have again, it seems to be quite organic. We get one collection, then other people donate and other people want to donate, and it builds and builds and builds. And the others are the supernatural and the paranormal and psychic investigation. Others are sort of Latin American studies is very strong. So for instance, there are these different, and there is overlap. So within the Latin American studies, we have the Latin American political pamphlets collection, which in itself is predominantly radical left from the 70s and 80s. So yeah, it's guided by these principles of research strengths, which it's very hard in some ways to see the pattern of how they've become these strengths over the 150 years. But certainly the cut bill collection falls strongly within at least one of those. In fact, more than one, because the literary studies side of it is very strong as well. And literary studies is one of our key areas. We are an arts and humanities and social sciences library. So as long as everything falls into there. But yeah, it's this, all our radical collections fall strongly into one of our areas of collecting.
Thanks. So we have another question about collecting from Leslie Howsam, who writes that the videos reminded me of the early days of the women's movement in the 1970s, when activists were concerned about rescuing archives before they were lost or destroyed. So do you, as archivists, work with activists who may have similar objectives? Yeah, maybe if either of you wants to sort of take that question.
Sure, I can start. Yes, we work with activist organizations and traditional historical society organizations, and we create our own sort of projects. The Filipino-American Digitization Project, which we're working with one of our professors, is an area we want to collect in, and we're going to grow in it. The Japanese-American Digitization Project is something that we saw. There were collections scattered around California, and we saw the need to get them all together in one format, csujad.com. And then as we collected this material, we got we ended up with over 100 Japanese American collections, just because we were involved and interested in that. And other institutions within the LA area were sort of filled up with the stuff. They couldn't take anything more. So we stepped right in at being a new archivist with new archives with a little bit of space. We also work with community organizations, the Compton Historical Society, and we do collaborative projects around Southern California with other archives, community archives, to get their material digitized. So we're also delving into the environmental movement in this area. There's been 100 years of oil exploration in Southern California, and there have developed a few environmental organizations that we're interested and intending to do collecting on.
Oh, good. We're probably less so linked up with the collecting from activist groups, although some of our collections have been collected by labor activists, but we work closely with activist groups disseminating the collections and working with them and contextualizing them. So just a few examples would be with the Cut Bill project. We are currently working on some projects with the Gaze the Word bookshop and people who worked on the Defend Gaze the Word campaign, you know, back in the 80s, and young readers now looking at the material and analysing the so-called obscenity of it. We have other colleagues working with some of our Anglophone Caribbean materials with some Guyanese community groups in London. And we're working also with Brixton-based Black Ink Publications, which was a community activist community publishers in the 80s and 90s that sort of sprung from the late 70s, in fact, from the uprisings in Brixton. And they're doing a sort of program, an intergenerational program this coming year to celebrate their 40th anniversary even. So we're working with them and using our collections as a springboard for that. So I would say we differ from what Greg's talking about, and that we're not going out into community groups and taking collections, although if they were to approach us, that would be a different thing, but we're not actively seeking that. But we do work with activist groups, yeah.
So if I can add on, I'm not, I don't work at the Archives Gay du Québec, but I'm just thinking of Simone's video, and in response, I guess, to Leslie's initial question. I mean, I think the Archives Gay du Québec is an interesting example of a community organ. It was founded by an activist movement. It was founded out of an activist group working during the AIDS crisis. So its initial collecting strategy was very delicately tied, as far as I understand, to activist groups. And I'm not sure the current state of things, but I think it still is quite tied to certain activist groups in Montreal. And I guess I just wanted to kind of ask a follow-up question to both of you about this. The Archives Gay du Québec is interesting because it is, I think, pretty well known within the community in Montreal, within the LGBTQ community, and people, actively seek it out. I think that people know that is where to bring collections, to the extent that I was just looking at their website, and I think they've had to put a pause on collecting just to sort of catch up with all the donations they've been receiving. So in your organizations, do you find is that the case, that people know about the existence and so people are seeking you out? Or do you find that you're doing some of the sort of detective work to find some of these collections? And Greg, we were talking earlier about that great image of you in that box, that pile of boxes in Los Angeles, which kind of gives the impression of you sort of sleuthing things out. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Yeah.
Sure. We have we have a lot of friends, and the friends talk about us and we talk about ourselves. And the material that you're talking about, the LA Free Press collection, was in the desert in Joshua Tree, California. It was in a bin, and we basically went out there. How we found out about it? A relatively well-known bibliographer talked to a bookstore who talked to us and said they were so tired and they didn't want to go and deal with it. So we decided we could go out and deal with it, and we spent a week out there trying to figure out where the material of the Free Press was amongst all this other stuff, 5,000 books and other material. And we did, and so it's a collaborative effort. We have another collection called the Tradeswomen Collection. A group of women in non-traditional trades got together 15 years ago and wanted to start an archive. We said, yes, come on in, bring it in. And so we collected that material, and we still are collecting material. And community archives are a little different sometimes with what they collect. They collect, T-shirts and buttons, but they still all have minutes and writings and other stuff also. So I don't know, did I focus in on the question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, at Senate House, we tend to have people approach us, and so, for instance, the Cut Bill collection, we were approached by the executor of the collection, who was an academic who works in the field of queer history, and we'd made contact with him a few years before during an exhibition we'd held called Queer Between the Covers, which looked at how literature, English language literature, had expressed queerness from the sort of 17th century up to the 1990s, and based on that, we were approached regarding the Cut Bill collection. And it tends to be, yes, word of mouth, that people know we have other collections. We have yet to go to a scene quite like the one that Greg showed in his video.
Great. So I think we're kind of running up to almost the end of our Q&A. There are two questions left in the chat. One is from Julianne Simpson, one of the co-organizers, who was asking, I think, about reaching out to communities, which I think both of you have sort of answered. So I think I'll skip to the very last question, which I think is sort of a fun question. And this is about things that are not printed material or not things that we would traditionally sort of think of as bibliographic items. So the question is, Greg's presentation mentioned t-shirts and buttons. Can either presenter say more about collecting, preserving, and teaching with clothing? I'm wondering what a bibliographical approach to these materials might be. Were these t-shirts screen printed, block printed, something else? Were they previously worn? So this question is specifically about t-shirts, but I think we could also think about other non-traditional items, buttons, matchbooks. I know that at the AGQ, they have lots of materials from bars like matchbooks. So yeah, I wonder if either of you want to reflect a little bit on some of these items that end up in your collection that aren't textual items in the traditional sense of the word.
I mean, I suppose some of them would fall under ephemera, in which there is a whole world out there of how to assess and deal with the ephemerals. So I suppose matchbooks might go into that. And our collection certainly is full of ephemera, flyers, posters. We even have posters from CND marches and pacifist marches, some of them very early linking to the First World War, which have footprints on them because they were dropped on the floor during the march and someone's just picked it up. And so you've got the sort of the historic, the mud still left residue on the poster. So I think some of these things are still printed items. And like you said, with the t-shirts, there is a fashion historical element though. And I used to work at the London College of Fashion, which does have archives full of clothes, you know, and sessions could be based around the stitching or the design of a sole of a shoe, but they tend to be more material culture rather than bibliographic culture. So I don't know. I mean, the material culture and the object analysis and object-oriented learning, those fields are very strong, especially in arts education. And I wonder if there's anything that can be learnt from those about how you analyze an object that is free from text and free from what we consider a traditional bound printed object. But yeah, I think a lot of the things in our collection might still fall under traditional bibliographic theory in a way, because badges are printed, they often have text on, they have images on, they're printed images. Although we have things like suffragette silk buttonholes, which are flowers on a pin. I'm not quite sure how that would be analysed bibliographically.
Yeah, I would agree that we come at it from ephemeral point of view. I'm certainly more than willing to pull a poster off a telephone pole if I have to. Yeah. The buttons and the t-shirts, I came into a lot of these as a result of my experience volunteering with the One National Gay and Lesbian Archives, which is now the One Archives at USC. And they had a huge collection of t-shirts and buttons. As we gathered material from the tradeswomen and other community organizations, I would tend to stay away from that stuff, but basically because the tradeswomen and other organizations come from a community archive stuff, these t-shirts and these buttons are important and for their history. And sometimes that's one of the few ways that they can articulate that history colorfully. And so when I put a clothesline full of t-shirts in an exhibit, that is one way that I use them. The other way is have a drawer full of buttons, and it usually it excites folks, and they get interested in it. We haven't really done that much teaching with that type of material, but a lot of what I do is collect ephemeral material, enough of the ephemeral material that it creates a collection that it can get a student interested in going to the next step to see additional material. And so it's an important aspect for us for community archives.
I think you're right. I think it's a connection point that is very emotional quite often, to have something ephemeral that you can hold, and it is a direct connection with something of the past quite often. But I was just thinking about the bibliographic nature of fashion and clothing. And the only thing I can kind of tenuously link it to is sometimes some artist books I've seen have incorporated material and textile. And in fact, I remember one that I worked with many years ago, which was looking at gender, actually. And it was the body of it was actually a woman's body, or a womanly shaped body, but it was dressed in male clothing. And it was talking about it was called Sailor Secret, and it was housed in a casket. So you opened the casket and all the layers of clothes that you undressed the body were the pages that you turned, and they were just clothes though. But it was telling a story through the clothes. And I don't know whether there is something, that was a book, it was an artist's book, and it was telling something about women who were dressing as men to gain agency or for other reasons, and it was just an interesting way of looking at the body. And the book was a body, and using textile and clothing in that. And I wonder if there's some way you could maybe leap off from that into the idea of clothing and artifacts in that way, that what they tell, that they are another layer, they're a page in a sense as well.
Yeah, and before we close up, I just want to pick up on something you said, Leila. I think it's really interesting what you said, and Julianne has echoed it in the chat, this idea of sort of the emotion that is evoked by some of these objects. I think sort of these, non-traditional objects, non-traditional textual objects that evoke emotions in people and sort of draw them into the collections. And I think in collections like these that are often so closely associated with people's lived experience, these objects have a particular sort of power. So I think it's really interesting that although they kind of fall outside of what we might consider traditionally sort of bibliographic items, they do seem to be the items that often bring people into the collection. And I think Simone in her presentation mentioned something similar about some of the posters and the objects in the AGQ collection. It's often sort of the gateway that gets people into the collections, and then sort of from there they branch out and discover the richness of the collection.
Well, one of the things that's been really noticeable with regards to Jonathan Cutbill and Gaze the Word is that one of the things that has been revived of late, and I don't know if it's hit the States as well, but is the Pits and Perverts t-shirt, which was a benefit gig that was undertaken for lesbian and gay support the miners, which was the miners' strike in the UK in the early 80s, was supported by lesbian gay activist groups in London based at Gaze the Word, and Bronski Beat did a gig where they called the Pits and Perverts, and I see young people wandering around with that t-shirt now. And they know the history. And I think there was a film called Pride, which if you haven't seen, I recommend you see. It talks about this. It's a fictional film, but it talks of this incident. And I see that these T-shirts have been reprinted. So it's a second edition. It's a reprint edition of something that was printed once that had a very political, active, urgent moment, which now has historical agency, which linking young people to activism of the past in a T-shirt. Someone's put a Houseman's link there. Yeah, Houseman's.
Yeah, Julianne, good. Yeah,
Houseman's sell the Pits and Perverts t-shirt. Go to Houseman's if you're in King's Cross in London.
Well, unfortunately, I think we've sort of run past our time. So it's a sign of 3 excellent presentations, very engaging speakers, and really rich collections. I think that we've generated so much conversation. So if you did have a question today that didn't get answered, please do reach out to our panelists. So I'm sure we'll be happy to field questions. Their contact information is included, I think, in all of the videos that were pre-circulated. So you should have, or maybe not, but maybe I shouldn't have said that. But anyhow, or they can put it in the chat right now as we're wrapping up. So just to conclude, I'll thank, well, first of all the participants, Leila, Greg for having come, Richard and Simone, our other presenters who are unable to join us today, all 4 of them for these excellent presentations, and again to all the other organizers, and lastly to all the attendees who've made time today to come ask questions and learn about these wonderful collections. So thank you to everybody, and I wish you all a great day or afternoon wherever you happen to be. So bonne journée tout le monde.
And thank you very much for organising and hosting it, Erin, Mathieu, Simone, and Justine, everybody. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to everybody.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.